Let us hear these questions again. What makes a church a church? Is it the people, the leadership, fellowship, the music, the building, the money, communion, the ministries, the worship, the minister, the adults, the missions, the belief, the Bible, the committees, the meetings, or even just Jesus? Does the church even matter today? Is it relevant? Is it needed?
I said fellowship.
The current image of mainline churches includes many of the elements that we have just listed above. The image of church is what most who enter these doors and other mainline church doors expect. In today's message, when I talk about church, in some ways I'm going to limit myself to the images that were listed above, because these are the human images of church. And yet the human images are holding many of God's people back from actually doing God's call, because they cannot live up to the human expectations. Paul today is writing to the Philippians and reminding them that the true standard we are called to live is one that imitates Christ. We are called not to focus on earthly expectations, but heavenly ones. Because the earthly statistics of mainline churches do seem pretty hopeless. 63% of all churches are declining from the standards of church. To even obtain the elements to be the image that a current church is supposed to be, studies show that a church needs to be at least 130 members, which is not the case for most disciple churches. It's not the case for many mainline churches in general. And so then we must remind ourselves that God does not work in normal numbers, peoples, and statistics. Paul even reminds the Philippians to not let the naysaying get to us if we are truly aiming to be a part of the race that God has set before us. Because God is God, and God has always worked in the midst of impossibilities. At the same time, this does not mean that we should not come preparing for all the possibilities of the future of the church. To overlook the current information and statistics would be just as detrimental as thinking that God lives by them. Independence Christian Church, like most churches, is at a transitional point in its future. The average life cycle of most churches is 60 years. At the point of 60 years, a church can make a couple different moves. At that point, it begins to analyze its building and community. It can start to think about a repurposing track. It can go on a hospice track, a closure track, and a legacy track. I want to encourage you to take a moment to look at the image in your bulletin. When you built a new building in the late 1960s, from that there was a resurgence and transformation, as there was in many types of churches throughout the country. It moved many churches back around to the beginning. It let you circle and restart. The 60-year mark is an estimate because we are near that point. In most of our churches these days, we have options about what direction we move next. Basically, you have the options of how to live or how to die. And you can choose how to do that. Last week's sermon was important because it encouraged all of us to take time to stop and rest. When we stop and rest, all of us are able to then find a way to move forward, to find the energy and excitement to transform and shoot ourselves back around to the other side of the cycle. And Sabbath includes a very important process of mourning, grief. While change and transformation can be exciting and rejuvenating, it is important for all of us to be on the same page, to feel that excitement together. But to do that, to get ready to move, we must take the important step to recognize that for something new to begin, other images and ideas have to end. All of our earthly images of church that can weigh us down are also the things that we find comfort in knowing. Good or bad, we like our comforts of our images of church. And to let some of them go means that we need time. Time to stop. Time to provide closure, to mourn and reflect on both the celebrations and the griefs and the stories that got us to this point. It's just like cleaning out our closet. At some point, we have to pull everything out, go through our closet, and finally get rid of our favorite church outfits from the 80s. We have to take a moment to remember the good and bad moments that happened in those great outfits, those wonderful church styles of the past, and we need to recognize these moments. But we need to also be able to let them go so that they do not creep in and hinder the future moments we are aiming towards, the future moments God is calling to us. We let them go, we give them time, we give them space for closure, and then at that point, as a community of faith, we can let God. As a community, we can journey to the cross, experience the death, and then we get the joy of experiencing the resurrection, experiencing the heavenly, not the earthly. But that's hard to keep focused on the heavenly. It's hard because sometimes we'd rather just walk back up that hill. We'd rather just go backwards. We'd rather limit ourselves to the image of church from 50 years ago or even 15 years ago. We move back uphill, take energy away that is not forward-thinking or life-giving, but just drains us. And when we start to try to move back uphill to those previous images, we find many churches instead just get tired and decide to roll on down the hill and die. So if we choose to live as a church and as a community, we must all together be willing to go on a crazy faith ride. And that faith ride is not like the tempter's voice from last week. We begin instead as disciples of Christ, disciples following Christ in the journey that truly is the journey that listens to the voice that follows Jesus. It is through Jesus' voice and story that we trust, that we're able to say yes, and we are able to move forward into what God is calling us to be. We must be like the Philippians and press on forward with a trust that God can transform when we let go. We must be like Paul, who possibly wrote this letter from prison, awaiting his own death, to still find joy in God and not be afraid of earthly death. We let go of our fears, our images, our limitations, and even our exhaustion. If we are to move in a heavenly circle, we must see beyond the church to be the church. We must not look down. We must look forward with our eyes focused on an amazing, epic God who changed the world through one person and a whole lot of love. Many of the statistics and information you heard earlier comes from the work of Rick Morse, who is the leader of a general church level ministry called the Hope Partnership. The Hope Partnership works with new churches and transitional churches in the visioning and transitional process. You see, I truly believe, as I've said to you, we have the potential to shoot back and restart if that is where God is leading us. And if we are able to let go of the earthly images of church and reclaim the heavenly images of truly being God's people on this earth, which means we must then focus on the first two that are part of the list of living. We need to give closure. We need to think of our legacy. But most importantly, we need to take time to analyze what God is calling us to do in our community. And we've talked about that some with our story as we've looked at our community. We've even started to think about our building, and we'll talk more about that one next week. But we also need to know what our purpose is. We have to stop, think, and start to examine our purpose. So as we examine our story, we've started to have all of these conversations, and so it is really important to remember that we are in the time of Lent, a time of preparation, a time to think about the big questions of what God is calling us to be, and to help us assess where God is calling us as a community and as individuals to repurpose. The questions are important. I do not care about how to find the money to fix something. I don't. I care about the question of why we should fix something. What is God calling us to do? So this is the question I want you to think about. Take a pencil, take a pen, take the crayon from the kid next to you. But here's the big question. If you had all the money in the world and time and knew you could not fail, what ministry would you provide, or do you think this church should provide? Think about that. If you had all the money and time in the world and knew you could not fail, what ministry would you provide, or do you think this church should provide? This question should go alongside the question, what is the passion in your heart? What moves you? What do you love? Because if you love something and you're passionate about it, usually that's a good clue that God is working through that passion and that love. I have found often when I follow my heart, that is when God truly steps in to guide me as both an individual and within communities I serve. What is your passion? How would you help God's people? If you had all the money in the world, all the time in the world, and you knew you could not fail, what would we do? Because our citizenship is not on earthly things, but on heavenly things. It is on bigger things. And then we must be willing to think big. Think beyond earthly statistics and earthly expectations, and think about God expectations. While we have talked about the importance of saying no, we must also be trusting enough to say yes. Yes to the big dreams and passions that God has planted within us. And we must ask ourselves, how do we say yes? Because often I hear somebody go, yes, but it's followed by but and if only. But the question I have for you did not ask for the buts or the if onlys. It asks you to think about the big heavenly dream. The Hope Partnership provides foundational information, but it also provides quality guidance of ways to say yes. They have an article by Chris Gillibo, and it can help us overcome questions of buts and if onlys. I will post this article this week, but I want to lift up some of the things to help you say yes to that question, to help you really take time to think about the purpose. Do not model your definition of big things on what other people have done. You determine the success or act or accomplishing of the big things. You decide. You be the judge. Decide on big things without concern of feasibility. Don't worry about how you'll accomplish the big things. Think first and foremost about what the big things really are. Do not pursue half measures. The more big things you do, the easier it becomes to do big things. He even says, think long and hard about what you're afraid of, because your big things may relate to conquering those fears in some ways. he doesn't say go into this haphazardly, create safety nets, but maybe it's important to create unconventional safety nets. Think creatively about the big ways to do things. Plan everything around the desired result. Think what you want to do and plan backwards from it. And stop thinking that big things are risky. Not everything big or significant is risky, because most often complacency is the real risk. Except that some people may not understand the significance of your big things, but those that do will want to join you and come along. Some people will tell you, as I have said, that the most dangerous words in a church include, "We have never done it that way before." But I told you in my welcome luncheon that the other phrase that makes me concerned in most churches is, "We tried that once before and it didn't work." While there are changes and things that obviously as your new pastor I bring to the table, I need you to be in this with me as a team. I need you to think about what you're bringing to the table so I can support your big dreams and God's call for all of us as a community. What goes, what stays, what is added? And once we kind of figure and work through it all together, we will work to participate, dream big in heavenly ways, and we will bring it, and we have the potential to bring it loudly. And that isn't easy. I'm not asking you to do something that's easy, but it's passion-filled, and it's God-filled, and it's Holy Spirit-filled, and it can be fun. Complacency is not fun. God working through God's people, that is fun. That is exciting. It's even so exciting that Paul from jail can still find the joy. He can find the joy for himself, and he can even find the joy for the people. This is what he says. I want the very best for you. So do not waver. Stay on track. Let us think not about the earthly life cycles of the church, but the heavenly life cycles of the church. If you are willing to move outside that box and that image and to dream big, I invite you to come join us in this place as we are called to do what God has called us to do. Let us stand and sing our hymn of invitation together. You may be seated. Mine, Trevor. This week, we are inviting you to give to the ministry of Week of Compassion as well as your offering to the church. Week of Compassion is one of our most powerful ministries. I posted a few things online for you, but I wanted to go over them. There's also this book if you're interested in looking at it, but all of this information is also online. Week of Compassion works with many other partners. They work with the United Nations Development, they work with UNICEF, they also work with Bread of the World and Church World Service. So that any time there is a catastrophe or a disaster in our world, they are able to respond. And they respond because of us as the church. Here are some of the statistics they share with us to remember why would they respond. Nearly 1.5 billion people in developing countries live in extreme poverty, living on less than $1.25 a day. If you give $1.25 today, you are giving money to those who need it and live in extreme poverty. They also share that 51.4% of Americans will live in poverty at some point before the age of 65. 1 in 8 people still go to bed hungry in our world. 16,000 children die from hunger-related causes every day. In the United States, 14.5% of households struggle to put food on the table. 11% of the world's population still does not have any access to clean drinking water. The quotes that come in the back, the one to lift up for you today is from Theodore Roosevelt. Do what you can with what you have where you are. Throughout this week, a lot of times Week of Compassion says pay, stay, and pray until they are ready for you to come. This is the time where we ask you to pay, but I also encourage you throughout this week to stay and pray for the ministries that we are serving as well. I lift this up. It's an amazing ministry, and you are a part of it. You are helping people right now that you don't even realize. So I encourage you to give to this church and to Week of Compassion.